Hello Algebra 2 class. For today's classwork, there will be two videos, this being the first of the two videos. Let's continue on from where we left off. We looked at the graph of tangent, which is a new trig function, but we were okay with that because tangent was defined in terms of sine and cosine. Trig functions we were familiar with. So when we were graphing y equals tangent of x, we were in fact graphing y equals sine of x over cosine of x. And we knew these values, and we can recall these values very quickly using the unit circle. So at every radian measure, we could find all the x values, which represented cosine, and all the y values, which represented sine. And so when we made a table of values for sine and cosine, as you can see here, for every radian measure, I was able to find the tangent value because I already knew the sine and cosine values at those radians. So for example, at radian 0, I would get sine of x equals 0 and cosine of x equals 1. So 0 over 1 is 0. Next, pi over 6. Sine of pi over 6 is 1 over 2. Cosine of pi over 6 is square root of 3 over 2. If you take that as a fraction, we get square root 3 over 3. And likewise, we would do that for every value for tangent. And we graph this out. For today, I'm going to introduce the graph of cotangent. Now, cotangent, we ended the Zoom class introducing it as the reciprocal function for tangent. In other words, cotangent of x is simply 1 over tangent of x. So when we're graphing this out, we're graphing, oops, sorry, this is a typo. We're instead graphing y equals cosine of x over sine of x. Since it's just the tangent flipped upside down, and we are already familiar with sine and cosine values at the radians. So, and we do the exact same procedure for cotangent. So, if I look at this, for example, cotangent of 0 is going to be the cosine value, which is 1, over the sine value, which is 0, and that's why we got undefined. If we look at this, cotangent of pi over 6, cosine of pi over 6 is square root 3 over 2. Sine of pi over 6 is 1 over 2. If we do rainbow, or you notice that they both have a denominator of 2, we could cross that off. We would get square root 3, as you can see here and here. So we would do that for cotangent value, and you'll notice that for cotangent, the values are very similar to tangent. Oops. Let me do that in green. So we will see repeat values, and the graphs will look very similar, but there are major differences. So let's look at those differences. When we were looking at graph of tangent, we noted that tangent was not defined at certain values. So for example, at pi over 2, tangent was undefined. So we drew an asymptote at every radian measure where it was undefined, and we noticed that they were pi apart, which also went into the fact that the period for tangent is going to be pi. So this distance was pi, which then led us to finding out that this distance was pi over 2, and hence we could easily figure out that this asymptote is at x equals pi over 2, and this is at x equals negative pi over 2. Now likewise, cotangent will have asymptotes, but they will be at different radian measures. So for example, cotangent would be undefined at 0 and at pi. Again, they are pi apart, which indicates that the period for cotangent, just like tangent, is going to be pi. So this distance is going to be pi. Let me scroll down just a bit so you can see. So we have asymptote at x equals 0, and at x equals pi, and x equals 2 pi, and so forth, since each period is pi. Second difference is that you'll notice that, going back to the asymptotes, in the asymptotes, we noticed that the asymptotes for tangent were just going to be pi over 2, or half of the period apart from the middle point. In cotangent's case, we're going to graph it the same way we graphed sine and cosine, namely we start at 0. And we just simply graph a whole period apart, therefore indicating that the next asymptote is going to be at pi. Now this is going to be different than how we graphed tangent. So again, just to summarize that last part of point 1, when we're graphing tangent, we first graph the middle point because it was always going to be 0, 0 unless we moved to the right or to the left. And then we took the asymptotes based on how far apart they were, or the period value, which was always going to be pi over b. In cotangent's case, we're going to go back to how we graphed sine and cosine graphs, where we start at 0. So this will be our first asymptote, and this will be our second asymptote, and we will have a graph in between where the period is still going to be pi over b. The second difference is that for tangent values, you'll notice that they increase, but for cotangent values, they decrease. So that's why you see a line decreasing. All other values are going to be the same, namely the x-coordinates of the dots and the y-coordinate of the dots. So in that manner, they should be very, very similar. All right. For the end review due today, these are the 2 questions. Please graph these 2 out. I'm going to ask that you review the classwork we ended on in the Zoom class and view the second video that is assigned today in addition to this one. Please note that I have highlighted and read the changes to the questions from the questions in the videos. All right. Good luck.